Okay. So in the previous lesson, we have learned a lot of things: variables, shell, parameters. What else? By the way, for the shell parameters, have you tried those special parameters? If not, please try those parameters. But today, let's continue to do something more complicated. First, what's this? Nope. Okay. Chitra, you didn't try, but I think you will have time to try. So please try it after the class. Now let's start the flow control. When you write a program, the flow control and the loops, they are kind of basic blocks for constructing a program or a script. So today, let's finish the flow control and loops. After the flow control and loops, I think you can write very complicated programs or script using the shell script. So first, flow control. Let me see. Okay, Shuchen is here. Okay, let's wait for a moment. Hello, Shuchen. Okay, let's continue. So flow control. So here we will learn some flow control like if, then, and if then else, if then else if, then else, something like that. So let's start from the very basic flow control, the if statement. If something happened or if some condition is true, then let's do some or execute some commands. Else, let's do something else. So let's start from the very basic flow control. Let me go to this folder, this test folder. Let me make a directory. Let's say this is lecture, maybe lecture 4. I have a clean folder. Let's do something in this clean folder. Let's start the new script, flow.sh. So in this file, we're going to try the flow control command, which is if. Let's say, let's start a very basic flow control. For example, if $1 equals to banana. So do you remember what is $1? That's the positional parameter. So you can pass a value or parameter from the shell, and you can use the value of the parameters by using $1, $2. So now let's see. If $1 is banana, if this is true, then let's do something. Let's see, let's echo. Banana is good for health. Then let's finish it. Okay, so now this is a very basic usage for if statement. So if, then the square bracket, then you have some logic operations like a comparison. If you compare this string, the value of this string to this string, if the match each other, then that is true. So if this is true, the blocks or the command in the command or the executable blocks here will be executed. Now let's try, see if it works. Okay, flow.flow.sh. If we run it, there's a mistake because you didn't give any parameter. So let's say if we give a parameter of banana. So now this is your $1 parameter, the first parameter passed to your program. Let's see what happens. So it's supposed to echo.
Dr. Lee, you, I think you mistype the in $1 mistyping.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, you have sharp eyes. Now let's do it again. If it's you pass the parameter as banana, then it is cute. Banana is good for health. So this is if. Of course, if you pass another parameter or the value of the parameter is not banana, let's say apple, it doesn't do anything. Okay. So sometimes if the statement is true, we want to run some commands. But if the statement is false, we want to run something else. Then in this case, we can use else. Echo. What? Let's say $1 is not banana. Okay, so that's the new program. Let's look through the program again. So if this is true, means you pass the parameter of banana, then it echo banana is good for health. Otherwise, no matter what else you input, it will show this parameter is not a banana. So let's see. If we run first banana, then banana is good for health. If we run, for example, orange, it shows orange is not a banana. So that's if-else statement. Sometimes you need even more complicated flow control, like if else if else. Then in this case, you can do if echo. Let's say if you okay, if you want to do something else after you checked the $1 is not banana, let's make a case here. If $1 is not banana but it's apple, let's echo something. Let's say $1 or apple is good for health. Okay, let's make something different. Maybe banana is good for teeth because it's soft. Apple is good for health. Now you have a more complicated flow control. If the $1 is banana, it runs here. If it's not banana, then it continues to run else if. It will compare $1 to apple. If $1's value is apple, then it echo apple is good for health. Otherwise, no matter what you input, for all the other cases, it will echo $1 is not banana or apple. Okay, so that's the flow or logic here. Let's run it again. Flow, banana. Okay, there's something wrong. Let's see what happened. Okay, we missed a statement, which is then. So once you use if or else if, it need another statement, which is then, and then you can execute your command. Now let's run it again. If we input banana, it will say banana is good for teeth. Apple. Apple is good for health. Let's say orange. So orange is not banana, neither apple. So that's flow control example here. The most complicated flow control might be something like this: if then, else if then, else if then, else if then. You can add a lot of else if then blocks, and at the end you can add else. And of course, even inside one executable blocks, for example, here you can add another if. You can start another if statement here based on your requirement. If you need to do some other comparison or other logic operations, you can do something inside. If, then, or if, then, else, something like this. But here, we're not going to introduce the if statement inside another if statement, but you can try after this class. Okay, so this is the if statement. So here we used the string comparison logarithm, but actually some binary comparison operator compares two variables or quantities can also be used. For example, if you want to compare some integers, you can use this operation. Dash eq means is equal to, dash ne is not equal to. Now let's try. Let's see. Let's write another program. Maybe it's mean.sh. So here we want to find minimum value from two input numbers. Let's say if. So in this example, we want to input two numbers, and we compare these two numbers, and we want to find out which number is the minimum number. So maybe let's make it more user-friendly. First, you can echo input two numbers. Let's use something we have learned in last class. Let's read two numbers. Read number 1, read number 2, and then echo the numbers are $num number 1, number 2, comma. Okay, first, I don't want to write too many lines. Let's just try this simple function. If it works, let's add some if statements to make sure there's no mistake. Okay, let's give it executable permission. In input two numbers. Let's say 1, 2. Okay, so far so good. It works. So you input two numbers. It gives you the output of the two numbers. Now, I want to remind you that here, when you use those comparison operations, they're all for integer. If you input some float numbers, it doesn't work. So let's just input integers. Input integers. Now let's start to compare those integers. Let's say if number 1 is less than number 2, then we can echo the numbers are number 1, number 2. The mean, the minima is, so if number 1 is smaller than number 2, then it's number 1, right? Okay. Else. Else the mean is number 2, of course. Then let's finish it. So now let's see it. So first you input two integers. If number 1 is less than number 2, then you output the mean is number 1. Otherwise, you output the mean is number 2. Okay, now let's try. Mean.sh. Now we need to input two integers. That's 3 and 5. Then the numbers are 3 and 5. The mean is 5. So there's something wrong. Okay. Now if I input 5 and 3, the mean is 3. So there is something wrong here. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's check the code. It's a good practice. Okay. So because, okay, this is a mistake. I shouldn't use this. So this comparison operation is in other language like C, but in shell, we need to use greater than, less than, in this way. It's dash LT. Okay, let's use dash LT. Means less than, if number 1 less than. Okay, now let's try again. Two numbers, 2, 6. So the mean is 2. Okay, let's switch the order to make sure it works well. Okay, so using this if statement, we can successfully compare the two integers and give the minimum of the two numbers. So you can think about, if you have, let's say, if you want to input 3 numbers and you want to find the minimum or maximum by using only the if statement, how to do it. maybe you can think about it. But here it's just the example of using the integer comparison operations. So here are all the operations you might need to use in the future if you want to do some integer comparisons. However, in a lot of cases, we don't want to compare integers. In most of the case, we compare floating numbers. So how to compare floating numbers? By default, the bash doesn't give a way to compare floating numbers. You need to use some other tricks. For example, bash also doesn't give you a tool to calculate or a command to calculate a sum of two numbers. So we used, if you remember in last class, we used the BC or the bash calculator to do the floating number calculations. For example, BC. In BC, you can calculate floating numbers, 2.3 times 3.2. So it gives you the result. And if you remember correctly, in our case, to use a command to calculate the floating number operations, you can first echo your expression like 2.3 plus 3.2 and pass it to BC by using a pipe. It will give you the result. So actually, when you do the comparison of floating numbers, you can use a similar ways by BC. For example, let's first get into BC. Now it's in the batch calculator. We have tried floating number calculations like plus, subtractions, multiplications like 5.5 times 2.1. You get the answer. Actually, BC can also do the comparison. For example, let's try. If I want to compare 1.3 and 2.1, if we want to compare those two numbers, what we can do is just do a comparison. 1.3 greater than 2.1. So it will give you the answer 0, means false. If you input 1.3 is less than 2.1, so the answer is true. So that means in BC, you can, let's say, do some comparisons of floating numbers by just using the way, like in other languages, like in C or C++, you just use the less than sign. Then the BC will give you the answer, either true or false. 1 is true, 0 is false. Then we can use this trick to do some floating number calculations. Now let's try our previous example, mean. Okay, so first let's try to compare floating numbers. Input two floating numbers. Okay. Let's comment out those lines. If you use a pound sign, these lines are commented out. Let's just run the first 3 lines to make sure there's no problem. Mean, 2 floating numbers. I would give floating numbers. There's something wrong. Okay. I should give 2 float numbers. 2.3, 3.3. We don't echo anything, so I don't know if it works well. So maybe let's output something. So after read those two numbers, let's output them to make sure it's right. Okay, so seems like it works. Now you can receive the numbers. Then this line is useless. I'll comment it out. Now let's modify the if statements. Now we cannot use number one less than number two again, because this less than, it can only be used to compare integers. Let's first try if we use it for comparing floating numbers, what will happen. 1.1, 2.2. So it was a integer expression expected. So it doesn't compare floating numbers. So it doesn't work. Now let's use BC. So what we can do is, if let's first echo number one is less than number two, and pass the result to BC. So from here, if number one is really less than number two, then BC will give you 1. Then this is 1. Okay, so now let's first try. So if there's 1, if this is 1, the mean should be number 1. But here we don't want 1 or 0 in the if statement. We want it to be true or false. So we need to compare this results by using the expansion parentheses to 1. So in this case, if the command is 1, means number 1 is really smaller than number 2, then the expanding parenthesis will give you a value of 1. If 1 equals to 1, means if this statement is true, means if number 1 is really less than number 2, then mean is number 1. Okay. Mean 1.1, 2.2. So here, seems like it works. The mean is 1.1. Now let's switch the order. 2.2, 1.1. Still, the mean is 1.1. So this is a way of comparing floating numbers. It's a little bit complicated because remember that Bash is not designed specifically for calculations or comparisons. It's mainly for handling like files. So when you do anything related to calculations or comparisons, especially floating numbers, then you need some tricks. So it seems like complicated, but once you use it for a couple of times, you will get familiar with it, and it's not so complicated. So besides this, there's something I want to remind you, which is, for example, when you use the if statement, the format is kind of fixed. For example, before this bracket, the square bracket, you need a space here. This space is required. And you also need a space before the ending bracket. If there's no space, it will give you some error. It will say command not found. Sometimes this will cause trouble, and the mean is wrong. See, it doesn't really find the minimum value. because the if statement, it doesn't work properly. So remember, when you run the if statement, you need a space after the beginning bracket and before the ending bracket. Okay, so that's if. So another thing we want to learn here is, in this class, is how to use loop. So loop is another important flow control in any program. Let's see how to use loops in Bash. There are several ways to make a loop or to write a loop. The first way is for loop, but for loop has at least two ways to run it. The first way to run for loop is for a value or a variable in a list of names or strings, then do done. Okay, so let's start from a script here. Let's try this for loop in a list. Let's define a variable which is perhaps for name in apple, banana, orange. Now here, let's try to understand it. So for something in some list, for some variable in a list. So here, name is your variable. Apple, banana, orange, that's your list. By using the for loop in this way, you will loop the variable, which is name, 3 times. The first time, in the first loop, in the first execution, the variable name, the value is apple. In the second time, the value of the name becomes banana. In the third time, the value of name becomes orange. Okay, for, in, do, done. So that's the format of using the for loop in a list. So you want to do something, then you can run some commands between do and done. Let's say echo name value is name. Okay, we just run a simple command in the do blocks. Give it permission. Let's run it. For loop. Then you will see it's running 3 times. So the name, the variable is name. The value of this name variable is first apple, then banana, then orange. So it runs 3 times, and in each time the value becomes this. Okay, so this is a very useful for loop because it doesn't loop in numbers. Usually, for example, in C or C++, MATLAB, any other language, most of any other languages, when you run a loop, the loop has to be numbers, especially integers. For example, you can loop based on a variable I or N. In the loop, N's value could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. But a very special and useful thing in Bash is you can do the loop based on number, and also you can assign values not based on number, but based on strings, like in this example. This is very useful because, for example, here, if you have a lot of files, you want use those names of the files as your list in the for loop, what you can do is you can, let's see, you can write your list in the way of this. So this is expanding parentheses. Do you remember what does it do? So the function of this expanding bracket is it first runs a command inside, and then the output of this command, in this case, it's list all the sh files, and then it substitute the command by its result. The result is, if you remember, it's 3 files. So in this case, you have a list of 3 files, and then you do the loop based on your files. If you run it, it will show name value is first flow.sh, for loop.sh, min.sh. So this is very useful. For example, maybe in some situation you want change all these files from sh file to maybe exe file or txt file. Then you can use this for loop to do it. You can use some other command to substitute sh into txt. Then by running a loop, you can handle a lot of files. You can, for example, if you have thousands of files in sh format, you can change them by using the loop to text file. So it's quite useful. This is the first way of using for loop. Now let's see the second way. Okay, so here is a test. Create 9 folders with name folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, folder 4, folder 9. Maybe let's do it. Let's do this test together. So for, we know we are going to use for, let's say fo name. F name means file name, folder names. In folder 1, folder 2, folder 3, folder 4, folder 5, folder 6, folder 7, folder 8, folder 9. We want to create 9 folders, then we can do something like make directory, which is f name. So here you use the for loop. The variable is f name. The f name will be folder 1, folder 2 until folder 9. So in each time the f name's value is changing, and you make the directory, which is the value of your f name. Maybe let's also output something. Echo f name, so that you know you're running this command. Otherwise, it doesn't output anything. Change mode. What's that? Invalid file mode. Flow.sh. Oh, we want to give executable permissions. Okay, so if we run this test, it will create 9 folders. If you check, you will see now you have so many folders from folder 1 to folder 9. So that's test of creating folders. That's 9 folders. That's not too much. But what about we want to create 90 folders or 900 folders? In this case, definitely you don't want create the folders by using um, this way, write a long list. So you need to figure out another better way. So one way we can use is use the C-style for loop, which is for expression 1, expression 2, expression 3, and do done. In this case, based on the 3 expressions, you can create or declare a variable, and you can assign different numbers to the variable. And then the for loop will start based on the values of your variable. Now let's start from a basic C-style for loop. C4 loop.sh. Okay. The usage is for double parentheses. In the double parentheses, you have 3 expressions or statement. So first, you declare a variable and assign the initial value. And then in the second expression, you give the condition of ending this for loop. At the end, in the third position or expression, you give the way of increasement. For example, a++ means a will be increased by 1 each time. So if you are familiar with any other languages like C language or Fortran or MATLAB, I think you should be familiar with this way. Now let's see for. Okay, so that's the format. Now let's input some variables. Let's use I. Usually we use I or N. Let it start from 1. I less equal to, let's say, 100. I plus plus. Do done. Let's do the easiest thing, which is just output the value of I. Okay, so change mode of C. Oh. Executable. Give it executable permission. Let's run it. C for loop. So it will loop 100 times. It's starting from 1 to 100. So in this case, if you look back to the test, if you want to create, let's say 900 folders, now you know how to create it, right? You can just use a C-style loop, C-style for loop. Let's try. So now let's loop it from 1 to 90. And then echo the value. And then make the IR, make a directory, which is folder $I. So in this case, you will have folder 1, folder 2 until folder 19. But before that, let's remove all the existing folders. Folder. So if it's a folder, you need -R. So now all the folders are removed. Now let's use a test. No, the C4 to try to create 90 folders and see if it works. So it's starting from 1 and ended at 90. So if you list it, you will see you have created 90 folders. So this is very useful in Shell. As you see, using the shell script, you're able to modify or create files, folders. So that's the advantage of shell. It's good at processing or handling files and folders. This is something very difficult for example, C language or MATLAB. If you want to use a C language to do the same thing, you can imagine how difficult it is. But in a Bash script, it's very simple. You just need a couple of lines, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. That's it. Okay. While loop. You can try while loop by yourself. We don't use it quite frequently. The way of using it is while something is true, then you do something. But remember that if you use a statement in the condition here, you want to say, for example, $A is less than something, you need to remember that you better to increase the value of A. Otherwise, the while loop will be an endless loop. So you can try the while loop by yourself if you're interested. Now here, some operations. So this is a way of some operations for floating numbers. You can use the operations of floating numbers by this expression command. But a better way is using BC. So let's just maybe focus on using BC. Let's forget about this way. Because in using this expression way, it's sometimes not very convenient, but it's optional. If you're interested, please read these slides and you can try to use the expression command. But a better way is just using BC, like here. Okay, so that's all for today. We don't have any other things. So today we have learned if statement and some loops like for loops. By using if statement and for loops, you can create your own script to handle a lot of files or folders or do some other things. Let's see, what's the homework? Operator you may need for homework 1. What is homework 1? I don't see a homework 1. No, I don't see any homework 1. So maybe let's make up a homework for your practice. So the homework could be, please use the loop. Okay, so please use the loop to rename your files, your txt files, into some other format. For example, you can modify txt files into, for example, text files. So find a folder. Maybe in this folder you have a lot of text files. Try to modify the extension from txt into text for each file. Or if you cannot find too many text files, perhaps you can find any other format, just change the format. Try to use loop to change formats of many files in a folder. So that's practice. That's not a homework. That's a practice. If you're interested, please try. So I will not check it, but it's a good practice. Okay, do you have any questions? Are you still here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. If no questions, I'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Keep safe.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Bye.
Bye.